Next, let's try to implement the same thing but using a header value instead. A custom header value that includes the version number. If we go back to our code, let's replace the version we were getting from getQueryStringVersion with one that calls getVersionFromHeader. And again, we're passing in that request because our little piece of code here is going to have to look through the request for those headers. So let me go ahead and generate a stub for it. And let's return a string since we want to get a version value from this. So let's create a quick const for what the name of our header is. And in my case, I'll call it version, counting K's version. You could call this anything you want. Typically, if a header starts with X, it's ignored by most anything, but continues to be included in the call. So it's a good way to create custom headers by just calling it that. And now what we'd like to do is look at the request.headers and find one with that name. We can do this by just checking to see if headers.contains one with our name. If it doesn't, we can just return one again from our getVersion header, because this will go ahead and be the default, just like we did with getFromQueryString. If so, we'll want to go ahead and get that header by calling headers getValues. GetValues is going to take the name of the header and then return a collection of the values. Now, a header can be defined more than once, and because of this, you may get one or more of these, but we're going to ignore all but the first version information. So if we say header name, we'll just say first or default. So go find the values for our header since we know it exists. And if the header does not equal null, just return the header value. Again, the same operation where we're assuming that we're going to get a version, go ahead and look up the controller, and go about our way. But in this way, it's not going to corrupt the URL with some information. This is going to be purely something that can be specified at the header level, and maybe even shared in that way, depending on your developer's code base. So let's make sure we can build it. And let's head over to Fiddler and go ahead and request this. If we make the request as is and we just execute it, we're going to get the JSON we expect, right? It's going to include information about the standard version. It's going to be defaulting back to the version 1 of our measures controller. But let's go ahead and add this header value, and let's execute it. Because we've included this in the header, you can see we're now getting that full version 2 of our API. Our URL is continuing to include that V information, so we're going to want to just go back to the model factory and excise that back out, because that's only really interesting when we're using QueryString to version that. Execute again. We can see we're using the same URL. We're not corrupting it in either case. It really comes down to what is being passed in as the header. This approach is interesting, but it's a little brute force. What we'd really like to do is be able to depend on something that's a little more standard, like media types. We'll do that next.